Hi everyone, this is Gwen from My Spiritual Butterfly. Welcome to my channel. Really lovely to see you here tonight. This is a sort of monthly conversation that I've been having with the lovely Jae Gibbs from Our Living Tree. And we've been tackling some topics around emotions which are normally kind of seen as maybe a little bit taboo or kind of hidden a little bit. And tonight is no exception, really. Tonight we're going to be talking about befriending grief and exploring that a little bit. We have some really interesting insights on that, and we'll obviously be sharing our own experiences of grief. But before we kind of get into that, I'm going to bring Jay on. And hi, Jay. Good to see you. Good to see you. Jay, did you want to? Oh, no, welcome back. Welcome back. Did you want to quickly introduce yourself? Those that don't know.
Yeah, sure. I'm Jay, and I'm an Embodiment Practitioner and Women's Circle Facilitator, in amongst other things. And I'm really, my work is really centered about us connecting and remembering our whole self and bringing the pieces back that maybe for whatever reason we've had to abandon or forget or minimize, or there's many things that can happen, and how we can get back in touch with our whole self and the wisdom that lives within us. So, yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much, Jay. So yes, we have an interesting topic tonight, one that sort of affects us both and affects pretty much everybody in the world at some point. The topic of grief. We've sort of entitled tonight, Befriending Grief. I'm just going to put the little ticker up there. So anyone watching right now, you're welcome to join in the conversation. You can comment below. We'll be keeping an eye on the comments. You may have a question for us. We really are open to receiving those, and we will answer those questions tonight during this live. But yeah, it's a really interesting topic to kind of dive into. And we kind of wanted to start initially by, because obviously a lot of us, we kind of know what grief means, but it's more kind of looking at the different aspects of grief. I think we'd sort of decided to sort of look at that and explore that initially. So the most familiar aspect of grief is obviously loss. And that's usually the hardest for a lot of people to bear when we lose someone. And usually it's usually a missing of them, I think, that kind of happens with that. It's we may be told that they've gone to a better place, they're looking after you now, but it's the missing of their presence here which affects us. I know when my mum passed in 2019, and she was 89. So even though age-wise you're kind of prepared for it on one level, but when it arrives, it's always really quite crushing and quite devastating to have to kind of go through that. And yeah, I mean, I'd lost my father in 2005 and maybe a couple of friends a few years later, but that I think for me was the strongest. The one that affected me the most was losing my mom at that time. And still kind of, we'll talk about this more really in terms of coping with grief and living with grief. And still every now and again that can kind of bring a tear to my eye, and you feel a little bit of a pain in the heart. But yeah, so just in terms of the different guises of grief, Jay, obviously loss we know is one aspect. Do you want to share some other aspects of grief that sort of may come up for us?
Yeah. It's first what I'm wanting to say is that grief, we're speaking about something that isn't really spoken a lot about. And so in my own experience of grief, it felt very, it was my personal experience of grief, and I didn't really find many outlets to explore what that really was, or how I was feeling, or there was a lot of what should be doing. There's a lot of guidance on some ideas about it, but it's a very personal thing, but it doesn't need to be a solitary thing. I think we'll come back to that, but I just want to say that. And then I'm there. The default is to go to grief in relation to a lost one, a person that has passed away. But I've come to recognize grief takes many different forms and is attached to many different types of loss. So loss can be the loss of a job or a career or something, a loss of a relationship, can be the loss of an idea of something, the life that you want or you vision, and not obtaining that kind of life that you thought you might have had. So there's or even in my personal situation, a childhood that I wanted that I didn't have, like an idea of a childhood that I didn't have. So loss comes in many different forms, and then there's a grief around that loss that isn't always acknowledged, especially with things like a job or something like that. You just expected to just kind of move on, get over it, and that doesn't give much space for acknowledging the feelings and the emotions that come with that. So yeah, that's what kind of comes up when we say what the different guises of grief. There's it's not just losing a person. There's many different ways that grief can show up, and I want to say that grief is a part of life. If we think about it in that way, actually grief is always present in some shape or form. Even if we had the childhood that we wanted, maybe we're just grieving childhood,
just missing it. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
The whatever childhood gave us, if there was kind of less responsibility or whatever, we could be grieving that, and by not kind of acknowledging or naming these things as a loss or grief, then we don't have a place to kind of put that feeling, that emotion around it, and it gets kind of pushed down and suppressed. So, yeah. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I think definitely with it resonates, doesn't it, in terms of not just being about loss of a person, but also it could even be a mother for their child leaving the home, leaving the family nest. There's a grieving there, isn't there? There are so many aspects, and with sometimes that grief can come when you're caring for an elderly parent and they're maybe suffering from dementia, Alzheimer's, and you're losing the mother or the father you once knew. So that grieving process comes in there as well. And even what was coming to me as you were saying that, even in terms of our own fitness and health, where we used to be able to do something, maybe something's happened where we no longer have that optimum health anymore, perhaps suffered something, you know, it could be any sort of serious illness or physical problem that means we're no longer who we once used to be. And so there's a grieving there for the life that we used to have that takes place. But definitely, as you say, that when there isn't space to face that and look at that and feel that, I think more importantly, feel that, then that's when, as you say, it gets pushed down. And a lot of the time it gets pushed down, particularly when you're grieving the loss of someone, because you have to step up and you have to make arrangements and you have to then move into, and that was the case with me, with my mom. You know, I had to 100% Lucia and then just do a lot of organizing and speaking to different institutions that come into that space that maybe you've never spoken to before. And so you don't have the time to grieve because you have to move on and keep moving forward to organize then, whether it's the funeral or, you know, the event to just that everybody is going to be coming to. So something else kind of takes over. And then definitely when that happens, that grief gets pushed down and isn't properly processed, which then prolongs it, if that makes sense, prolongs it, deepens it. So yeah, I think keeping on the subject of the loss of a person when they pass, you know, when you're working in the world of work and you have to be back in 5 days after you've lost someone, and there isn't much compassion for grief in terms of industry in the world of work and things like that. People kind of expect you to come back and be okay and get on with it. And, you know, in other cultures, you get more time. It's different, isn't it? It's kind of taken in a completely different way, which allows you to really fully express it and feel it, and complete that journey for yourself. So yeah, there's so many factors in our external environment that's basically the signal is get over this, move on, get back to normal. And a lot of it is because other people can't cope with you breaking down half the time. It's that, isn't it? They can't cope with you not being you and being strong and being there. So yeah, but it's an interesting thing to look at the different guises of grief and how that comes, as you say, with losing a job, and relationships particularly can feel like grief, because that person is no longer there. And as you say, also a childhood or a home that you loved or grew up in, there is something there that can cause that emotion to come up in us, that emotion of grief. So yeah.
Or the relationship that you haven't had, you know, the family that you desired and haven't, you know. So it can be something that you've had, but also something that you've never had, you know. And that's what I find fascinating, because that's maybe where you might not even know that there's some grief attached to that. Yeah.
That's interesting, because I've seen that with a couple of clients actually, who they're at a certain age now, they're in their 30s, which I think is still young, but they're kind of mourning the fact that they haven't maybe had a relationship or a marriage or a child. They're becoming into their 40s and 50s, and that also is exactly like you said, something they haven't had that they're kind of grieving for. And as time goes on, that grief kind of gets a little bit deeper. So I've seen that in a couple of clients as well, when it relates to, as you say, relationships and children that haven't been had. That grief is there. Yeah.
Yes. And just as you were saying about the relationship, or just going back to someone who's been lost, or someone who's transitioned, maybe is another way to think about it, you know. And I think it was it's through therapy, I think, my own therapy, that I started to kind of reframe what losing someone or death was, and that actually there is still a relationship. I'm still in relationship with that person. It's just a different relationship. They're not here in the physical form, but I can still choose to have a relationship with them in the now. You know, it doesn't need to be just purely of memory. I can still communicate and have conversation and just be present with them in different ways. And that for me gives me some comfort around that. If I think actually there's some gratitude in there for having had that physical relationship and for knowing them. Like, I think with my dad, and when my dad passed away, you know, that was very challenging situation, very difficult situation. And it took a lot of time to even just kind of really acknowledge that he wasn't here in the physical form. But as I say, after some time, I think actually what was a big point, a shift for me, was accepting that he wasn't here in physical form, that he wasn't going to, you know, be on the phone, or, you know, I was not going to see him like that again. But that actually we are still connected, always connected, and that there is love there, or, you know, that whatever bonded us is there. And that gave me just a different perspective and some relief around that kind of the confusion and the yearning and the sadness, the other kind of, and the anger, you know, the other emotions that kind of came up, also that weren't all acknowledged at that time either. It just gave a bit more ease and space around actually what I was experiencing.
Yeah, acceptance, I think, is key to moving forward, and it is that sort of letting go of the life you had before, with them in it and them around, as you say. And so once we're able to, and it takes time, doesn't it, really? As I said, with grief, it's a journey. Everybody's journey is unique and different. Yes. You know, if someone comes, you may find the same. People may come to you for healing or to work with you, and then you find they've only just lost that person. It's only been a couple of months, and they're wanting to, because it's so painful. It's like such a painful feeling in the heart, and I think people just want to move forward from that, but they find they can't. And some others, you know, it's been longer. It's been 18 months. It's been maybe 5 years. Everybody is different in how they process that grief, how they come to terms with it, get on with it. So it does take time, but the eventual doorway they walk through is that doorway of acceptance, I think, at some point, whenever that time is right for them. There's a kind of accepting that this is the life now, and there's a bit of reflection on maybe what would they have wanted for us, for me being here. Would they want me to continue to be feeling sad and depressed and down, or so acceptance is the key thing. But when that comes, I think it's not something you can force. It's difficult, but it's really, once we're in the emotion of it, and we're feeling it and we're connecting to it, and sometimes we fear the depths of it, but then when we go there, I said that to you earlier, when we go there, we then realize it's never as dark or as deep as we think it's going to be. And a lot of the time it's the fear of that keeps us from sort of moving into it. It's worse than the actual act of just falling into the grief itself.
Yes.
But yeah, the other side of that is that you just come to terms with the loss and the acceptance, and then you're able to move through that. But I think we always will have a missing, a little bit of a yearning for them that never actually completely goes for most people. But it just doesn't last as long, and you don't dwell in it for as long, and maybe you see another type of you call in another type of memory, a happier memory, maybe. Or
I want to say, well, you embrace the yearning a little, rather than resisting it, fighting against it. Like embrace that yearning as like a part of love. You know, we can that can be also part of it, of that intensity as well. I don't know if you use that word, but the intensity of loss and grief can make us retreat, and there's, you know, that is a I don't want to say right, because there's no right or wrong, but that is a way to also, you know, process griefs. Sometimes we have to just titrate almost between the intensity and maybe, as you said, doing the practical things to, you know, just move through that phase. But the intensity, in my experience, starts to lessen with some time, but also with me turning towards the intensity a little bit, with me kind of being with that feeling and not being so scared to feel the deep hurt that is really there, but doing it with some compassion for myself, really, and learning, and that's a learning in itself. You know, a journey that I'm still definitely on, about how to be compassionate with myself and my emotions. But I suppose that it's, for me, always the acceptance and the turning towards something with some care and tenderness allows that feeling to become, as you were kind of mentioning, become a bit more familiar and less scary and less overwhelming, and that you kind of, or there's a kind of trust that you can feel that and not be fully consumed, because I think that is the fear we spoke about, that when we spoke before, wasn't it, that it would be all, you know, all consuming, and that there's no way back. There's no way back from it. And often I've found, when I feel like that on a personal level, or even witnessing it in other people, there's something about moving through that releases something.
Yeah, definitely. That the grief is compassion, sitting with it, feeling it, not being afraid of it, and allowing yourself. It's an outlet for the body. It's an outlet for that energy, for that emotion. So it needs to come up and out. The tears need to flow. You may need to scream. You may need to cry. Whatever it looks like for you, that needs to happen. And if it doesn't, then, as we said, it prolongs it. So it is, expressing your grief is a compassionate thing to do for yourself, regardless of what others are expecting you to do and how they're expecting you to show up. So it's interesting. And I think going back to what you said about heartache and relationships, and I was reflecting on that today. Obviously, we've been focusing a lot on the loss of a person as well, but we have highlighted the other types of loss we can have and grief we can have. And with relationships, for me personally, I know others have a different experience, but at the time when you're going through heartache in a relationship, it does feel really painful. It feels just like grief and the loss of a person in that sense, because you are losing that person. But certainly with time, when I look back on those past relationships, I don't feel that emotion at all. I don't feel that grief. I don't feel that regret, sorrow. Sometimes I'm like, oh my God, you're so silly. Why were you so upset about that person? It was so awful, or whatever it might be. It's a different thing. On my personal relationships anyway, when I look back at my other relationships, whether I caused the breakup or they've caused the breakup, when I look back now, after the time has passed, I'm like, oh, at the time you're in the depths of this despair, aren't you? And you're like, oh my God, I'm never going to love again. I'm never going to feel different to how I'm feeling today. And I think that's the difference with when somebody transitions, you probably will always feel that loss, that emotion of sadness around them. Whereas with heartache, although it is very close to grief and synonymous to grief, and it is a grieving at the time, once that time has passed, you look back and it's almost like really, I think because it's more connected with a rejection sometimes of you, or getting something wrong. You're making it something about you and your self-worth. It's slightly different to losing someone, if that makes sense, when you're going through heartache. That was just coming up.
And we were talking about a little bit about that with attachment, weren't we? It's like that attachment to something, and as you were saying, you move on a few years and that attachment is gone, so therefore that intensity isn't alive in the same way anymore, because actually I've let go of whatever that relationship was, or the idea of that relationship, or how that made me feel about myself. I might have let go of that. So then it is also tied in with how attached you are to something. That determines, the sense of loss and the sense of grief then that is related to it. So that's really interesting, that you say that. And I also, just as you were speaking there, I was thinking about, the intensity of newness, which is something that I've kind of been flirting with last few months. But like anything that is new, there is a certain level of intensity about it. It could be, really excited and intensity, or maybe a bit anxious, but there tends to be anything that comes in new it kind of shakes things up, doesn't it? It like destabilizes things for a moment, and that in itself is intense. So like I'm thinking about someone passing and transitioning. As you said right at the beginning, we can never really prepare for that. Even if we know it's coming, we can never really prepare for that. And it's always going to be a new experience. And so that will add a layer of intensity to that. And as you say, breaking up with someone, that's a shift, that's something new. So I was just thinking about that as well.
Yeah, I guess all the things we mentioned in terms of the different guises of grief, whether it is, you're right, you're suddenly facing a new situation, you're suddenly out of your comfort zone, whether it's, a child leaving the nest, or the loss of a job, and you're, okay, what do I do now? So you're quite right. There is something, it's the fact that there's something new now coming up. and you're used to the old way, and it's this, and it does feel, yes, there's an excitement there, and or an intensity of emotion, I think is a really nice way to put it, because you suddenly have to be on high alert for this new thing that's kind of going on, or this new way of living or being. I like that. It makes sense. That makes sense. That brings us on to, you touched on it there, and we've touched on it a little bit there, but it brings us on to this question, really. Is grief different to sadness?
Yeah, I think where I am with this is they are two different things. They're related. They're like relations. And was it anger? We were saying frustration is a relation of anger, right?
Yeah, they're on the same spectrum, I'd say.
Same spectrum. And this feels like the same thing, like sadness in there. It's a part of grieving, but it's not grief. It's not all of grief. And also the other way of my feeling is that we can be sad for many different reasons. The sadness can just come over us, and it might not have a source unless that we can pinpoint. And of course, that could be related to some hidden grief or some unacknowledged grief, and it could be almost like an indicator that there might be something underneath it. But I also think sadness can be its own thing, I'm kind of like, I don't think there's a definitive with it, but that's my kind of sense of it, is that sadness is an aspect of grief, but not what your
because you mentioned before it's an attachment. Grief is more about something that we're attached to, and then we lose that thing. Whereas sadness, you could just wake up and it could be hormones, it could be anything that's kind of kicking that sadness in. Whereas grief always seems to be related to loss of something, including all the things we've already listed. A person, a situation, a thing, money, it could be anything. So the grieving is usually a result of a prior attachment to someone, something, which is what you highlighted earlier. So that kind of makes sense. Whereas sadness, but definitely I think they're on the same spectrum. They're on the same, just different ends of the stick, maybe. But sadness is an aspect of grief. Grief may not necessarily be an aspect of sadness. That makes sense.
Completely. Sadness lives within the spectrum of grief, but not necessarily the other way. They're very related. But I remember that now. Making it's attached to something, whereas sadness might not necessarily be attached to something. So
like that.
And I'm kind of jumping back a little bit, but when you were saying earlier on about there not being, the time or the kind of space given for grief, I think this also impacts how we grieve as well. So we might not, be able to pull these things apart, all the different aspects of grief. It just kind of gets lumped into this big ball of, well, my kind of association, a big ball of something that feels really overwhelming to even touch upon. And if there was more kind of time or support, or if culturally there was a different way to approach grief, that might be completely different experience. And I'm thinking about when we originally spoke, and you know, the professional wailers that are part of certain cultures, like people are paid to come to the funeral or the ceremony and, you know, grieve, wail for the passing, for the person that has transitioned, and in some way let that be an outlet for the family or the, you know, the relatives, the close ones. And yeah, just there's that, like you said earlier, there are other cultures like give space to grief in different ways. There's different ways to acknowledge also people that have passed, like ancestral practices and ways of acknowledging and honoring and exploring maybe a different relationship with that person, or that, you know, even that thing that is no longer there. And in some way that seems to me to support this a movement to acceptance, and to support a movement to you know, reframing, having maybe a different, more compassionate, more supportive relationship with grief. And I really feel like that's needed, because I feel like we're all living with grief in some way. No one's, it's almost like a measure of being alive in a sense. That if you're alive, you kind of are, there's an element of grief somewhere there.
Yeah, the cultural differences, I completely agree with that. I remember when my dad passed, it was 2005, and the funeral was in the Caribbean, in St. Lucia. And I remember, you know, me and my brother being, obviously we were all, you know, really, really sort of sad and overcome with grief at the time, but we were mortified at the approach to grief, which was you know, people brought in photographers and pictures, and people took pictures of my father in the coffin and the whole funeral thing. And at the time in the UK, that wasn't happening. But then in the Caribbean, as you said, it's part of life. And they wanted memories of the day, and they wanted to kind of see it and celebrate in a different way. Flick forward now, everybody's doing that. They're live streaming the funerals, they're taking pictures. It's now completely normal in the UK, in the US, whereas, you know, how many years ago was that now? So all those years ago, it just wasn't the done thing. And so it was a shock for me and my brother. I will never forget that. So yeah, the cultural differences, but now that's kind of expanding a little bit, but having people professionally wail at the funerals, I know they do that a lot on the African continent, quite a lot. But it's that acceptance that this is happening, and we need to express this and get it out of our body and feel it in order to process it properly. And that person deserves us to feel it and say it and cry and all those things. So it is really
respectful, not, you know, actually seen as disrespectful not to do that.
It's the opposite in the UK, I guess, the Western world. It's to kind of stiff up a lip. They're there, be strong. That's all. The first thing you say to someone who loses somebody. Be strong.
Be strong.
And you with you know, when you're as a Reiki practitioner, when I'm giving someone Reiki, we can feel the energy of that grief on the heart chakra on the back. So we almost suppress that grief, that energy from the front, from the approach. We kind of protect ourselves from there. We have to put this brave face on. But when you turn someone over, place your hands on their upper back, which is still the heart chakra, you feel all of that grief. You feel the sadness, you feel the pain in your hands, you feel it starting to release. So it just gets placed deeper and deeper into the body. But yeah, it's just really interesting, the cultural approaches, the different cultural approaches to death, really, is kind of what we're grieving.
That makes so much, as you're saying that, Gwen, that makes so much sense, that we kind of push it further back and back and back, that it would kind of sit somewhere in the back of the body, like where we don't have to see it or feel it, notice it, and that but it's still there, isn't it? It doesn't go. And actually, like we're saying about the wailing or the expression of it, that allows the energy to move through and not be trapped back there. And when you were saying about being in the Caribbean for your dad's funeral, I'm thinking about my grandparents' funeral, both of them, and there was definitely, like, the elders were at the graveside and they were singing and crying and singing and crying for hours by the grave. And something here gets lost, that was definitely, like, that was very accepted, normal. And I remember thinking, oh, wow, that's just like such a show of emotion that that feels uncomfortable. There's a discomfort, like we become uncomfortable with our own emotions and the expression and being seen to be emotional. And I'm not suggesting that we walk around all day, every day, forever, but I think actually in the allowance or just the expression of that, it actually helps to dissipate some of that intensity and find a new way to live with the grief.
100%. Yeah. Having to, those around someone who's lost someone, we need to learn to hold space for that person and allow them to have an outlet, whatever that looks like, without any judgment. And those feeling that grief need to feel they can express it without judgment. And that just helps them to heal. Definitely helps to heal. But it gets pushed down if we don't express it. And Chinese medicine, we hold sadness in the lungs. So that's literally where it goes.
Sadness in the lungs, which actually, as you're saying, kind of being at the back of the heart chakra, like there's a correspondence, isn't there?
A lot of people end up with respiratory problems due to that prolonged kind of grief, or not even prolonged grief, the unexpressed grief that's there, for sure. Honey, Jay. So when is grief unhealthy, Jay? When is it unhealthy? If ever, maybe it's not.
If ever, I'm thinking, like we kind of touched on it earlier, that there's many different ways to grieve, and we're all gonna move through that in our own way, at our own time. The pace will be different. It's not linear, like it waves, it comes back on itself. Things get brought up, other events will also bring those feelings back up. And we were saying Christmas coming up, that like holidays, birthdays, those moments can be times when that intensity can rise. And so I don't think it's a timeline. I think it's a relational thing. It's is it a kind of, when it becomes like it starts to interrupt or disrupt other relationships, whether there's just this seeping in and through all aspects of life. I think for me, that then is a time to think about seeking help, you know, think about seeking support, and that to me says it's trying to be seen, but it's coming through in kind of covert ways, and so there's a desire for it to be expressed, and maybe that can't be done in solitude, that can't be done on your own. Maybe that is something that there's, you know, that's, it needs to be supported to come
and that,
through.
yeah, for sure. And that could look like obviously depression, and it's difficult to give a time frame on you know, when you move out of sadness and into depression, but it could be depression, it could be someone who's lost someone and you realize that then that they can't even get up in the morning. They're no longer functioning, as you say, they're not tidying up the house or themselves. Maybe they're not able to work. Then we know that there needs to be an intervention there for sure. So they need some support, they need some help. I mean, I would say that's the other thing we're probably not good at here as well, because we don't have the community of other cultures sometimes around us. We don't have the support around us in our own, with our friends or our family. It's a lot of people are quite isolated, as you mentioned before. And so it may be that, you know, we sort of try to reach out for that help a lot sooner, kind of before we need it, almost as a preventative measure, as opposed to, you know, waiting for things to really disintegrate. But at the beginning of the grief, seeking support and a nice network and, you know, a group of people who allow you to express that grief is important, and maybe share their stories of grief is probably something that a lot of the time we think we can cope and we can get on with it and we'll get over it and we'll be fine in a month's time. But as you said,
Time will heal, and
a lot there. So I think, you know, because we do live in such an isolated way, you know, our culture is really different to others sometimes, that we need that support, I think, a lot sooner than we think, and we reach out for it sometimes way too late, sometimes not at all. But if we get that support in the beginning, it helps us to kind of get through it and sell through it more easily, I think. But yeah, I think when we're seeing those signs of dysfunction, as you say, when it's spilling into other areas, as you say, and other relationships are suffering, then, you know, maybe we should reach out at that point. Because it can be quite destructive.
And I want to say that it's for us as community as well, and to be more attentive. And as you're saying, we do live in, you know, kind of little bubbles, our own bubbles, and I think as if there is a community, or, you know, a friends group or family that knows someone who has lost someone or has gone through a divorce, let's say, or something like that, that really to check in with them, and check in, you know, there's not like a time when you shouldn't check in on that. There's not a cut-off time. I'm thinking about, you know, when people pass particularly, and there's the organizing of the funeral, and in the Caribbean culture there's the 9 nights, and there's all of that, and there's lots of people around initially, and then after the funeral people tend to disperse, and actually that is the time when you really need people around just to check in and see. It's when it goes quiet, isn't it? That's when you kind of feel where you really are. And so I think it's a collective responsibility responsibility for us to kind of change the culture around grief, and I think to de-shame. I think there's some shame around grief as well. You know, that when you're in it and when you're feeling it, that some way you've got to put your best, you know, face forward and not show too much, or that you've got to move on at a certain point, or that you don't want to burden other people with your pain. And you spoke to that at the beginning. You know, people do struggle watching other people in pain because it brings up their own pain and loss. So there's challenges there, but what I tend to observe is that when we collect, you know, when we come together, we find that we've got a lot of things in common, and we don't feel so alone around our feelings, that actually our feelings are more, they're unique to us, but they're not individual, you know, they're not only ours. Grief is not only ours. We can meet in places of grief, you know. I share my feelings around grief with you, Gwen, and some of it will resonate, and vice versa, and we can connect in that place too. So yeah, and of course we looked at support. We looked at support services.
We did, yeah. I'll just get Cruz up if anyone needs any support. Yeah, that you can contact Cruz if you do need support, if you've recently lost someone, or even if you're still grieving after some time and you feel you need some support. There are also several kind of smaller bereavement groups that gather, some for specific cultures as well, so you can find that commonality that you may be looking for, and that sense of communion. But I think it's important for people to reach out, and even if they think they're coping and they're getting on with it, it is nice just to just speak to someone else, as you say, and share stories, and realize that you're not alone. You're not the only one feeling this way. And that takes away some of the shame, the guilt that you talked about, Jay, where people feel that, oh, I should be over it by now. It's been this long. It's been that long. So these groups are great at kind of just starting to normalize how you're feeling, and help you to understand that this is part of that journey. And as you said, everyone's bereavement or grief journey is different. And so, yeah, this is one of the groups that we wanted to share with people. If you did need that kind of support, then do reach out. So just in terms of finishing off now, so wanting to look at how we can invite grief with love. We touched on a little bit of it when we talked about compassion, and sitting with self, and sitting with that emotion, sitting with that feeling. But there is another aspect to, particularly here, we're talking more about losing someone, someone who's transitioned. Did you want to speak a bit more on it, Jay?
Yeah, I think I spoke a little bit about it before, and it was really around this kind of building a new relationship with that person. So making some space for that, like giving some space, some dedicated time. I also want to say I've noticed more and more that there are workshops out there, grief-based workshops that are kind of held by healers and different practitioners, and that can be supportive in many different ways, with losing a loved one, or actually, a loss of any sort, can be worked through, and that can give you some, going to an organized workshop or something can give you some tools around grieving. But also, I think for me, the acceptance that grief is a part of life has really allowed me to be with it in a different way, and not to push it away so much, and to bring it in and to invite it in and give grief space, like check in with grief, like, where am I with my grief this week, and does it need tending to? And in that, something like, the remembrance of the person that might be causing, that might be the source of the grief or the thing. Yeah. And the remembrance of them, or the honoring of them in some way. People sometimes go to the graveside and put flowers on, or use that as a kind of point of contact. It could be many different things. It could be a song that reminds you, or that means something. There's different practices that you could intentionally bring in, just to start to feel more familiar with the grief, and learn your own way of expressing what that is and how it wants to emerge. I feel that I can find some gratitude for having that person in my life, and of knowing that person, and how they've impacted my life in different ways, and what I learned through knowing them. And then there can be joyful memories as well. There can be sad memories, and there can be sad associations there, and then there can be joyful memories as well. And that's where I'm kind of coming to with my grief, is that there's space. There's actually quite fertile ground there, to explore, actually, in this different relationship with grief. It can be also, like, it can bring up a lot of gratitude, and it can also bring up moments of joy, tears of joy, tears of sadness, but there's definitely love there. And it's almost the love that that is the source of the hurt, of the pain, because there was love, there is love. It's still there. It doesn't have to diminish. It just changes.
Yeah, I think that's important, because it allows you to connect with them in a different way, as you said. And in the spiritual world, it's believed that we need to raise our vibration a little bit in order for our loved ones to contact us, communicate with us, let them know that they're here, or let us know that they're here.
Yes.
And it's nice to even ask for a sign. I've done that before with my mom, and it might be, show me a butterfly or a white feather or a magpie, and you'll get a little sign that they're around. I've even had friends say that the lights would flicker, or things like that. So they're trying to say, look, I'm okay, I'm around. But it does, when you reconnect with the love that you had, it's rather than through the sadness, but through the purity of the love that you had, that raises your vibration a little bit. And then you're able to have little conversations, and just a knowing of what the answer is. They may not necessarily hear their voice, but there's just a knowing. And that's how I sort of connect with my mum. on a daily basis, or if I need some help with something, I'm like,
Yeah.
Mom, what do I do with this? Or, you know, and I bringing gratitude into that is lovely as well, just to kind of, you know, remember them in that way. And as you, I love that through a song, or even sharing or thinking about a memory that makes you laugh about them.
Yes.
So yeah, that comes. And I think also with the, you know, the compassion we spoke about earlier, the acceptance, and that there doesn't have to be this finite time when you no longer feel those things, when you wake up and you don't feel anything about your loved one. It's never going to happen. And so once we almost accept that there's, you're always going to have a little twinge in your heart now and again when you think of them, a little tear, as you say. But yeah, I think it's lovely just to connect with them in a different way, in a vibrational way where they can actually let you know that they're still around. So yeah.
Yes.
I love
Yeah.
that.
I love that. I love that. 'Cause it reminds me, you've taken me back to when my dad passed, and I had visited the graveside, and there were just ladybirds everywhere, and I hadn't seen a
Oh,
ladybird. I
wow.
don't remember seeing a ladybird since my childhood, and I just, something just said, that's him. I just knew it was a sign. And then my brother saw ladybirds. You know, ladybirds just became like a continuing theme at kind of key moments, and I just received that as a communication. And that was before I was kind of actively, you know, I had a practice. Now, you know, I have an ancestral altar. I have a picture of my dad and my grandparents on my altar. You know, I have every Monday I spend time with my grandmother. You know, that's her day. She chose that day, so I just check in with her, and you know, so I think there's many things that we can do. There's no rules about it. We can feel our way into it, and sometimes, you know, these things can be dismissed as kind of superstition, or, you know, sometimes even, you know, evil or something like that. And I want to say there's comfort there, there's relief there, there's love there, there's joy and gratitude there. Why would you not want to, you know, open yourself up to that as well? The sadness and the loss. So yeah, there's other choices that we can explore.
Wonderful. Oh, I love it, Jay. Thank you so much. It's been an amazing conversation again about grief.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping it's kind of helped others maybe reframe some things for them, giving them a different perspective on things. Guys out there, you're welcome to we didn't see many comments, but any comments or questions after we've finished the live, you're welcome to post those. But yeah, the summary is just trust. It's grief is a journey. It sounds like a cliched phase or phrase to say, but that's the truth of it. It's individual to everybody. Everyone is different, but just notice when you're suppressing it and pushing it down, and just reach out so you can find a space where you can fully express that grief, which allows you to move forward a little bit. You know, moving into acceptance, as we said, and the expectation that you should one day wake up and not feel anything is we should move away from that, I think, and embrace that, embrace grief in its entirety, and reach out for support. Is, you know, as I mentioned earlier, is the main thing. You don't have to do it alone. Everyone has suffered grief at some point in their life. So do reach out if you are suffering still. And anyone who knows someone who's lost someone, just keep an eye on them and make sure they're okay. And particularly, as you say, Jay, when everyone has kind of gone back to their day-to-day, and the funeral's over and everything else is over, that person may need you even more. So do remember them in those moments. But yeah, I'll put the cruise bereavement number up one last time. So if anyone does need that, do reach out to cruise. But as I said, there are other sort of organizations out there designed to support you through grief, and some are culturally specific if that's what you need. Some are women only, gender specific. There are a few out there, because talking is a great way to get that up and out of your body, as well as the tears, but just having an ability to share and talk and get that out of your body so it doesn't get stuck there and make things worse. But yeah, thank you so much, Jay. An absolutely brilliant talk, as I said.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed that. We were looking, the next talk we're going to do, because we've got 2024 coming up pretty soon, not long now, we were going to look at something maybe a little bit more lighthearted, self-nourishment for 2024. So this is around self-care, self-nurturing, and just kind of fortifying yourself ready for the year to come. Maybe a little bit of reflection there. So I'm hoping that you guys can join us for that. It's going to be amazing. If you enjoyed tonight's talk and conversation, then do be sure to like and subscribe for the next one. Join us for that and many more. If there's a topic you'd like us to cover as well, do comment below and let me know. And Jay and I will sort of consider that. But yeah, we really appreciate you joining us tonight. It's just been wonderful. Jay, where can people get hold of you if they want to reach out to you, talk to you, work with you?
You can find me at Our Living Tree on Instagram, on the web, on my website. And I think that's it for now. Okay. I think that's,
lovely. If you would like to send me a message, there should be information in the description below, but you can email me. You can go to my website, Gwen at myspiritualbutterfly.com. Please be sure to sort of live stream that we're doing here, but also do check the channel for, if you're interested in Reiki, for the Reiki videos, meditations, and some coaching bites as well. There's a lot of information here to support you. So yeah, do sort of check those out too. But as I said, if anyone has any questions, do put them in the comments below and we'll come back to them. So yes, Jay and I look forward to seeing you again next time. Thank you so much once again, Jay. It's been wonderful having you with us.
Amazing. Thanks for having me again.
Oh, you're welcome. It's such an enjoyable conversation. It always is enjoyable. But yes, thank you, Jay, and thank you everybody for watching tonight. And we'll see you again soon. Thank you so much. Bye.